Welcome to the Base Podcast. This is part 2 of our discussion with Professor Donald Rayfield on the life and times of Anton Chekhov. If you haven't listened to part 1, we recommend you go back to that first. Please enjoy the podcast.
And so he writes the play that a lot of people will know in the 1890s, in 1895, 1896. He writes this.
A lot of people know it, I would say, from about 1897, 1898.
This is The
Seagull is notorious as a terrible failure. Is one of the worst nights any dramatist had in St. Petersburg. So, people ran in horror. But then he arranged the disaster himself. You choose the theatre where you know that the actors and actresses are most hostile to you in St. Petersburg. You then arrange the invitations for the audience of the people that you've actually used as characters. You give the actors and actresses the clothes that these people wear in reality. So his girlfriend Lika is there. Her new lover and father of her illegitimate child, Potapenko, is there. And in case he doesn't realize, his trousers are on the actor playing his part, the Trigorin. You have the medallion that another woman gave you, and you give it to the actress playing Nina and so on. And then you put these people in the audience. So the fact that the audience is upset by what they see, because they're there, people they know are there, they're recognized, and then you're amazed the whole thing is a disaster.
Why does he do this? Is this a self-destructive
something? Or it's a bomb. It's a suicide bomb. I think he's a suicide bomber. He disliked the Petersburg atmosphere, the people, the critics, the things he said about the theatre critics in St. Petersburg. Pointed out that who was living with which actor and so on, and therefore could be predicted to review the play in such a way. And it took a lot of persuasion for him to give this play to the new theatre in Moscow, when Nemirovich Danchenko, Stanislavski's colleague, who'd also come from Taganrog, begged to let him put on The Seagull and take full responsibility, and that's where it started. And Moscow had its first traffic jams outside the theatre. You couldn't get seats. It was an extraordinary transformation from a marginal playwright to the playwright, which in some ways sort of killed him, because they insisted they had to have a new play for each season. Mm-hmm. And also, I think it's the origin of his marriage.
Okay.
I think the policy of some theatres was, perhaps still is, that if you've got a dramatist you wish to keep, you find your most beautiful actress and see if you can marry her off. Tactic. Dramatist. They did that with Gorky, and they're able to keep him in the Moscow Arts Theatre. He was already married, but that didn't stop the theatre. And they did that with Chekhov, with Knipper. And it was she who pressed for marriage. He resisted and resisted. You have all these famous remarks about, I don't want a wife who's like the sun that rises every morning. I could put up with one that's like the moon that rises up occasionally. But in some ways, if you were a marriage agency, you would say, well, she's an ideal wife for Anton Chekhov. She has beautiful handwriting, which for Chekhov is very, very important. It's the one thing he complained about. Because actresses tended to have very bad handwriting. They very often didn't have an education. She had a beautiful handwriting. She spoke several foreign languages, which is useful for dealing with his foreign correspondence. She nursed a terminally ill colleague. She could give injections, even if you were dying of TB. Also, she was financially independent, unlike all his former women friends. She was not only a very good actress, she was also a very good businesswoman. She was a shareholder in the theatre. And she was capable of going wild at parties, while being totally sober in all her decisions. and he resisted marrying her. And she really gave him an ultimatum, saying, I'm not coming to your bedroom anymore because the stairs squeak and it upsets your mother.
Who did she play in The Seagull, Olga? She Nina or Arkadina?
She was I think she was Nina at first.
She was Nina, and so you in the book you say that there's a link between Trigorin and Anton. Do you think that?
Oh yes, it's one of the few places in all his work where he parodies himself, because Trigorin is given lines from Chekhov's own prose, and even from his letters saying, "I've got to write, complaining." It's a sort of mill.
Yes, I remember these lines.
Constantine complains that it's easy for Trigorin to come up with things like moonlight shining on a bottle and a weir, which is straight out of a Chekhov story.
Right.
So he put himself there.
Yeah, Trigorin is in the Seagull. He seems quite frustrated with his limits as a writer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Trigorin is partly Chekhov, I would say, and Trepliev, the one that shoots himself, is the other half. He splits himself in two, I would say.
And so this is incredible, isn't it? Because he meets, so this actress playing Nina is the woman who will fall in love with him, and he will marry this younger.
Yes. Well, several Ninas fell in love with him and tried to.
So all these women fall in love with Chekhov. This seems to be quite a common thing. He seems to have lots of women who are very attracted to him.
I think many doctors will say this is a problem of the profession, like being a vicar too.
And there's
really need to have the CCTV on.
Yeah. Good idea.
There's the weird thing that you talk about with, is it Laika, who's one of his on-off girlfriends, who
Miss Yenova. Yes, she was.
Who Nina's kind of based on.
Every Russian biographer thinks that was Chekhov's big mistake not to marry her.
Right.
She was very self-sacrificing. She kept on trying to organize journeys to get the honeymoons. Her father was an important official on the railway, so he could get them first-class tickets anywhere. And he was very, very tempted by her, and it was certainly fair, but he handed her to his best friend, basically.
And she has a child with him, an illegitimate child.
Yes. And the really eerie thing is that in The Seagull, Nina's child dies.
Yep.
And then Nika's child dies a few months later in reality. So the reality follows the play.
Yeah, what a fascinating period. And also, is this the production? So Danchenko and Stanislavski have seen this kind of awful first production, but seen the incredible potential in the play. They've taken it. And is it Meyerhold, Vladimir Meyerhold, who...
No, Meyerhold came later. Meyerhold was associated with the New Arts Theatre.
Did he?
But he was convinced that he could do it better, and he had his own theatre split off. They're famous for their cherry orchard, which was far less realistic. It was Stanislavski and Nemirovich Danchenko who were the couple who ran the theatre, and Meyerhold had to leave. There were only two bears in that den.
So, but he did what I thought that Meyerhold, as an actor, had played the role.
Oh, as an actor, yes, an actor. Sorry, later he became a director.
Yes, so he became a director, but is he involved in this incredible story with all these kind of characters and art imitating life and crossing over? In Meyerhold, is he the actor who's playing Constantine within all of this?
I don't remember that. I'm sorry. Yes.
I always thought it was, but I might.
He may have. Yes, he may well have. Yes.
Because Stanislavski
played Trigorin, yes.
Yeah. And did he direct it, or did Nemirovich Danchenko direct The Seagull?
Nemirovich Danchenko was more the literary advisor, and he worked separately with the actors on interpretation. Stanislavski was more interested in the actual staging.
Right.
Would, as they said, train the cockroaches.
And what's Chekhov's relationship with Stanislavski? Because from your book, he doesn't seem...
Well, it was tetchy.
Yeah.
Because he felt Stanislavski was ridiculous in some ways.
Why was he...
Of getting the frogs to croak at the right time, of having an actor go to the bathhouse to listen to the crickets so they could imitate a cricket noise. And of course, they didn't have recordings machine. Everything had to be improvised to make noises. And Stanislavski's attention to detail was in some ways excessive. But and Nemirovich Danchenko was far greater as an interpreter. And when actors said, "I don't understand this play. Why does he say that? How am I to say that?" That he did all the hard work persuading an actor or actress to do it the way that Chekhov wanted to. On the other hand, Chekhov was jealous of Nemirovich Danchenko, who was almost certainly Knipper's lover as well as her drama teacher.
Yeah.
So it was a joint producer-director relationship.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole sort of menage a trois, and
Yes.
Stanislavski's in there.
The Moscow Art Theatre has an archive which is full of interesting things, but they will not publish, and they don't like admitting people. And the things I've seen there, I only saw by accident when somebody gave me the wrong file, which is nothing but actresses complaining to directors of other actresses' affairs with directors and so on, and people getting parts not because of their talent, but because of their personal relationships. So it was a hornet's nest of intrigue. On the other hand, they did have the talent.
Yeah. So have we jumped over the only thing I'm wondering about Uncle Vanya. When did Uncle Vanya's
Uncle Vanya is interesting because it's a rewrite of The Wood Demon. It's an example of how to turn a disaster into a triumph. If you look at Wood Demon, which was written in 1890 and which flopped, and which I think almost nobody ever tries to stage now, because it has a happy ending, a sort of great big tea party on the lawn, which everyone is reconciled. It's a hopelessly unconvincing and un-Chekhovian ending. And then turn it into Uncle Vanya with a completely different last act and cut half the characters and merge the other half of the characters. It's what a really good editor would do in a bad play. And Chekhov did it himself. And nobody quite knows when he did it, after the failure of Wood Demon, or whether he did it after the success of The Seagull. But it suddenly appeared. It was a play he'd written before, but clearly worked on very hard. And it's a sort of inspiration to us all. You can take your worst disasters and just edit them into something completely different.
Yeah.
My introduction to Chekhov and a realization that there was far more to him than I'd realized as a student was when I had a job in Australia. And we had a department half full of Russians who'd been expelled from Manchuria and local Australians. And to weld them together, I thought the best way is to make them put on a play. And we put it on in Australia, and Australia was then, a long time ago, a very liberal country. I went to the police station, got a real revolver. I went to a pet shop, got a real blackbird. And in the middle of the second act, just when required, tropical storm broke out, terrific wind, windows smashing and so on. We played the old Russian Tsarist national anthem before the play started, and all these Russian emigres burst into tears. And it was a very, very powerful play in terms of the effect on the audience and the improvement in the Russian of the characters, of course. And I realized that there was something in Chekhov that you don't see on the page, but you put it on stage, and even if it's an amateur production, it has a magical effect, extraordinary in that way.
Yeah.
The way everything hangs together.
Yeah, how lovely. What a lovely story. And so we've got a few questions, Donald, we'd love to ask you in just at the end. But why I think that as we're kind of coming to the end of Chekhov's life here, he dies a young man. He's done The Seagull, Uncle Vanya. And the next big kind of play is Three Sisters, which I'm actually working on at the moment with some students. And it's a brilliant piece. It's quite depressing, and his health's deteriorating, but he's a big dramatist in Russia, and he writes The Three Sisters, and this also was a huge success.
Especially among women. It was regarded in Russia as the first feminist play in which the women come out as mistreated, far superior morally, in every way intellectually to the men. The men are just this regiment of soldiers who are going to move on and leave them stranded in these provinces. And they'd be dumped there by their late father. Again, the corpse that decides the fate of everybody. There's a description of by a hostile reviewer in St. Petersburg saying that every woman in the theatre who'd ever had an affair was in tears at the end of that play.
Yeah, I remember that in your book. Yeah.
Yes. So it really, and there are parodies of it.
Well, it's also an interesting piece because while it might be, I can see how you could see it through a feminist lens, but there's also this brilliant clash between Natasha, who's the sort of new some sort of upstart. She comes from a lower class. She moves into this house. She sort of almost
breeds the sisters out of their house.
room
out of the house,
room by room. It's this incredible character, and there's this,
and then completely emasculates Andre.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's one reason he was obviously giving tippers why I do not wish to be married. In fact, it's like Cyril Connolly's remark: the enemy of talent is the pram in the hall.
The enemy of talent is the pram in the hall.
Yeah.
How wonderful. And she comes in, and the sisters give her a hard time, and the sisters are always complaining, and they want to go to Moscow and have
She has her revenge.
She has her revenge, and I see her as the kind of like not the hero of the piece, but she kind of drives through, because she's seen as quite vulgar, and even Andre describes her as vulgar.
Yes.
Life is vulgar, but she does win. She sort of wins the play. They all end up in like sharing bedrooms again, and she's suddenly got children everywhere.
Yes. Well, she's a sexual being, unlike two of the sisters, Olga and Irina, and clearly that's what wins Andrei over. Yes, there's a lot in that play that comes from the stories. The hopeless fiancé who plays the violin and doesn't get on with anything is in the story of The Bride. He recycles quite a lot, but it was his most successful play, The Three Sisters, I think, and certainly in terms of audience appreciation.
Yeah, right, okay.
And it's generated a lot of sort of follow-ups. Three Sisters Go to Moscow was one. What happens to them after the revolution?
Right. Who wrote that?
I can't remember his name. And Helen Zizou wrote Mrs. Vershinin, another feminist take on the Three Sisters, in which Vershinin's wife talks about those devils, those sisters who've seduced my husband.
Yeah.
So it's a play with a lot of follow-up. There was the Cherry Orchard. Well, the Cherry Orchard too has a lot. You can set the Cherry Orchard in the Appalachian Mountains. Firefox, it's been set in Ireland. It's been set in Australia. Any country has decaying estates.
I once saw The Three Sisters set in Trinidad, and it was British colonial officers there, and the sisters were Trinidadian sisters. It was fantastic. It was at the kiln in Kilburn in North London.
Oh, yes.
It really worked as a piece, actually. It's I love that play. I'm working on it. I think The Seagull. What do you have a favourite play, Donald?
I suppose their favourite for different reasons. Uncle Vanya, because it's so economical, just 9 characters, and you get through so much. Even you might think the green message is overdone, a little less on forests and the rivers. It seems like a modern insert.
Uncle Vanya, that's all.
The Cherry Orchard has most surprises. You've got 2 guns in it, and Chekhov's rule that if there's a gun in Act 1, it's got to fire by Act 3. Neither Epichoda's rifle nor Charlotte's rifle or Epichoda's revolver are fired at all. In the Cherry the doctor doesn't turn up. It's very sort of a bit like Beckett and Waiting for Godot. Godot doesn't turn up, and the doctor doesn't turn up. Every other Chekhov play, the doctor is there, observing the action.
Yeah, and this is his final play. So Three Sisters is a huge success, and as his health is really deteriorating, he ends his life with.
He was bullied in writing. If you look at the manuscript, it's clearly written by someone who's on his deathbed. It's terribly slowly written, very carefully. The manuscript is one of the few that survived. Most manuscripts Chekhov destroyed once they'd gone to the printers or to the playhouse. Written with great pain, I think. Yeah.
Written with great pain, yeah. And this is so he's in 1904, and Chekhov is 44 when he dies.
Yes.
And his final words were, I haven't had champagne for.
Well, according to his widow, and Olga Knipper tends to be rather fanciful as I'm dying. According to two more reliable witnesses, the brothers Rabinek, who I think were sent to observe him by Olga's family, he didn't say anything. He was comatose.
He was comatose, so this is maybe some sort of fabricated, brilliant.
Olga Knipper was a fairly inventive person, not only about her own personal life, but about what Chekhov said and what he planned to do.
Right. It's kind of quite a brilliant lie, isn't it? To sort of come up with that. The last line of your partner's life.
I haven't drunk champagne for a long time, and there's a tradition true in Germany and in Russia that when a doctor treated another doctor and felt that they couldn't do any more for you, they ordered a bottle of champagne.
Right. Very nice.
So when your bottle of champagne is ordered, if you're a doctor and another doctor has ordered it, you know it's nothing to celebrate.
A quick question just on the cherry orchard there. Do you think he was trying to push artistic boundaries? Was he experimenting a little bit? You said there was sort of pre-echoes of Beckett.
Oh, yes, I think he didn't know where the boundaries were.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he didn't know that, for instance, you had to resolve questions. You had to provide a denouement. He was constantly criticized for not providing an ending, not knowing what was going to happen to the characters. And he said something which is a pun in Russian and in French too, is I don't know how to tie my shoelaces and I don't know how to untie my shoelaces. Denouement, of course, is untying. You could say about his stories that they are basically the middle of a story, and that's what he taught, I think, modern short story writers. You don't need to have a beginning, which you give so-and-so was born such a time, such a place, and you don't need an ending, so-and-so was very happy ever after, or so-and-so died of misery. You just want the middle bit. The knot is the interesting thing, not the untying of it. That was his innovation. I think that's what other writers have learned from.
And yet he seems to do all this innovating like very quietly. I mean, he's not a theorist about aesthetics at all.
No, and in language, he's completely normative. I mean, he does have people speaking in dialect or idiolect occasionally, but you couldn't write a dictionary of Chekhov's language, whereas other Russian writers, or Dickens or other Hardy, you would have a dictionary of their language, and you say, this is their remarkable language. Chekhov is completely normal. That's why he's so good for people learning Russian, or I think for people learning to write, actually. One of the most interesting things that hasn't been published in translation is Chekhov's corrections of his friends and lady friends' writing, where he crosses out things and removes the adverbs and just simplifies. He taught Gorky how to write. He was a very, very good correspondence, creative writing program.
How amazing. The idea Gorky's a fascinating character. So fantastic. I feel like you've taken us through Chekhov's life with fantastic, meticulous detail, and thank you, Donald. Do we ask this question that one of the interesting questions is this thing about this illegitimate daughter?
Yes, this is still in progress. I received a few weeks ago a handwritten autobiography diary by this daughter, written just a few months before she died. She died in the same way as Chekhov. She caught pneumonia by riding her horse to see a patient in a Serbian winter. And on her deathbed, she was still vaccinating children in this little Serbian town. She was a doctor. And she had TB. And they drove her to hospital, and she was dead on arrival at 38. And I now have the original diary, which I'm handling in white gloves. And I'm trying to get arrangements to get DNA taken from it. And there's a company in Oxford that does it, and there's a specialist in Israel who will fly over. The question of whether they'll do it for free or whether they'll want a large fee. My feeling is if the DNA test is positive, they'd do it for free because it'd be If it's negative, it wouldn't be very interesting. My problem with the whole thing is that the timeline is difficult, because the time for conception is a time when the girl, the daughter of the man who first put on Ivanov, Nina Koch, was in St. Petersburg as a student at university courses for women, and Chekhov was in Moscow, very, very ill and very, very busy and very, very hot. And as far as I can find out from the archives, she turned up for all her exams in May. So what would have had to happen was she took the night train on Saturday, saw him on Sunday, took the night train to get back to St. Petersburg on Monday. It's possible. And then all the clues I have is that there is a very reputable authority, a woman who's a widow of a composer, who pointed out as a little girl she played with this Tatiana Koch, and Tatiana Koch's mother told her mother that the father was Anton Chekhov, but nobody was to know. Now, I've been in touch with the family of this woman, Alisa Shebalina, and I turned out I knew her great nephew, who's a viola player in Moscow, and the family knew all about it, and they talked about it. But in Soviet times, you weren't supposed to talk about anything scandalous, even dead famous writers, let alone living ones. They kept it quiet. And she approached the Chekhov Museum with photographs of the two of them together. And the identity is confirmed by what I now have from Serbia, by people who knew the Tatiana Koch, who was a nurse in the White Army in the Crimea, and her mother got out of the Soviet Union to join her in Yugoslavia. And they lived in Yugoslavia 25 years. This supposed daughter of Chekhov married 4 times. She's clearly not a very, very good at marriage. And when asked who her father was, she said he was not a good person, not a nice person, which seems unlikely, you would say about Chekhov, even if he'd let you down.
Yeah.
Not acknowledging paternity. But close friends of this, or the mother of this Tatiana Koch, said that they were sure it was either Chekhov or Ivan Bunin, who was a well-known womanizer between his second and third wives. But I checked where Bunin was at the right time, and he was 1,000 miles away. So it's unlikely, very unlikely.
She have children, this woman?
Tatiana didn't have any children. She adopted a Russian child from an orphanage in Serbia, and that Russian child died in Berlin in 1943 of probably suicide. She was a war worker in one of Hitler's factories. So there's no more posterity. But if I can get someone to do the micro DNA, then we'll know for good. The man Zilberstein, who does these micro DNA, is quite famous now because he did Chekhov's blood stain on his nightshirt, which Olga Knipper kept under glass and didn't wash, fortunately. And it revealed all Chekhov's medication, and it revealed it wasn't actually TB that killed him, but a stroke, ischemia, a cerebral stroke.
Mm.
He also did Stalin's DNA from the thumbprints that Stalin used to leave on people's books. And the interesting thing is Stalin was taking lithium.
Wow.
Which in those days was not used as a psychiatric drug, except in Denmark. In Russia, it was just used for gout. But it would have had the effect of making him a little less maniac.
Right.
It might explain why there are fewer executions in his last few years than there were in his previous decade. And they've just done a letter from Dracula, Vladimir Dracula. But all they could show from the DNA was the hyperactivity.
Right. How brilliant. And so, Donald, one of the questions that I was thinking of was what were in your sort of study, your great study of this man, what changed about your perceptions of Anton Chekhov? So when you sort of first kind of thought you became interested in this person and you studied him, did you have an original perception of him that was changed through your kind of studies?
It became more complicated. I thought him extremely nice, extremely generous, extremely self-sacrificing. which he was. But every now and again, of course, things suddenly turned. He'd become quite merciless. And I was convinced that the Russians like to think, well, actually, at heart, he was an Orthodox Christian and really believed in God and so on. He'd been brought up and he knew the biblical texts, he knew the liturgy, he loved priests, he loved monks. That's certainly true. They're always positive in his work, or nearly always. But you read him and you realize he's a complete Richard Dawkins. He really does believe that the world is finite and makes no sense and is certainly not created.
Yeah, he does mention. I mean, people mention Jesus, don't they? But he does mention Jesus in a letter to his brother quite near the end of his life that I thought was quite interesting in your book. I won't be able to. Yeah, but I get that. But I would say, I get a bit of some Dawkins vibe from him, don't you? More than that.
He doesn't seem that interested in sort of really theological topics, philosophical topics, particularly, right?
No, when he has characters having discussions, let's philosophize, you can clearly think they are a joke. That's where he's very, very different from any other Russian writer, where there's philosopher bad and philosopher good have an argument. In Chekhov, they're both like two peacocks with showing each other their enormous fantails.
This is one of the questions that people always ask is, what do the English get wrong? What do we not understand about Chekhov? Apparently we don't understand Chekhov. Russians always say you don't get it.
Well, Russians always say that about everything. I think the English understand most Russian literature extremely well. Chekhov, they didn't understand it at first. No, they thought it was highly improper. How can he sit on a bench with a girl that he knows to be pregnant? Was one remark about the cherry orchard. But then a lot of Russians didn't understand him. Gorky said when he put on and paid for the cherries, I don't know what all these people are whining about. The characters. But he still forked out 4,000 rubles for it. But no, I think Chekhov, the thing about Chekhov in translation, he is completely understandable.
Yeah.
There are Russian writers that are very difficult to understand because they're very difficult to translate. I would say Gogol and Leskov, who are two magnificent writers, but very hard to translate and very hard to understand when you do translate them.
Yeah. I also, what I find really, really fun about Chekhov is in the modern world, we have so much access to like things to do, phones, magazines, books, TV. Yeah. And you get these characters coming into a room and they sit there and they're all together. And then one of them will say, well, should we philosophize? And
yes.
And in a way, you would do that. I mean, I'd actually quite like you sort of almost want more of that now, wouldn't you? To sort of actually sit there with nothing else to do. We're just all sat here in this nice big old sort of decaying mansion. Let's talk philosophy, everyone. I think I quite enjoy these characters. I quite enjoy the in 3 seasons.
You have to find someone with no mobile signal here.
Yeah. I always say that to the actors. I'm like, it's not that strange in this into a room and just sit down. That's it. You just sit for a bit. Let other people are talking. You're just sitting there. That's not strange as we think it would be. You know, I find interesting.
There are some pubs in London where you're not allowed to use your phone, and people sit, and when they put down their copy of the Times, they sometimes start talking.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Well,
do you have? Sorry, just final. I mean, you kind of hinted at an answer for this, but do you have any explanation other than just that the plays are like really, really great, right? Of why like there are 5 versions of his plays on at the moment in London? Why most modern English playwrights, British playwrights will have done a version of a Chekhov play, will have done an updating. Is there something about the English that kind of matches Chekhov's?
Oh yes, I think that he's by far the most popular Russian writer. One thing, he doesn't tell you what to do. He doesn't tell you to give all your money to the poor or sacrifice yourself for your country. He doesn't give instructions like that. He is clearly a gardener. He was a gardener. And writers who have gardens, as you know, get visited and read. It didn't happen straight away. Not until the 1930s, really, when we had various exiled Russian directors like Mikhail Chekhov in Dartington, and we had Komisarjevsky, who felt the British were probably too stupid to appreciate Chekhov, but he'd do his best. And then it took on, and then dramatists, there's Shaw's Heartbreak House is pure Chekhov. There's quite a few sort of Chekhovian playwrights. So I think it's rather like, pianists who train on the art of fugue or whatever. British dramatists and British short story writers train on Chekhov. It's a very good school, and readers are not put off by it. There aren't too many characters in a story. You don't have that long list of names that you get when you open a Dostoevsky novel. You find a page of characters, then you find that Dostoevsky has forgotten the middle name of someone and changed it halfway through.
But you think there's something about
Tolstoy that the last part of Anna Karenina could have been chopped. When the train runs over Anna, that is the end of the story. But no. And Chekhov would never do a thing like that to a reader.
There's something about his brevity, but also you said there's something about the fact that he's apolitical that is very modern and very appealing.
Yes. I mean, he did once, unfortunately it's lost, give an interview about Dreyfus case, and he did admire the French for having a parliament in which someone could stand up and criticize a minister. Clearly he would have liked Russia to be a parliamentary monarchy, but it didn't interest him very much. I think he saw the problem not with the constitution, but with the people. Russia's anti-Semitism upset him a lot. He had Jewish girlfriends, had Jewish friends. He'd been to school with Jews. Taganrog was a city where Jews were allowed to live and to go to school. So there was a political side to him, but he didn't want to participate. He didn't like lawyers. He didn't like politicians. Certain professions he did like. He admired soldiers. He admired priests, but not politicians and lawyers.
Yeah,
civil servants.
And why do you think he is considered, after sort of William Shakespeare, I suppose he's probably up there with seen as the greatest dramatists of all time?
I suppose he's infinitely variable. You can set Shakespeare anywhere in the world, almost at any time, most of the plays at least, and you can do that with Chekhov, but you can't do that with all that many dramatists, I think.
It's interesting. Yeah.
It's like music you can orchestrate for different orchestras, different combinations. And it leaves so many questions open that you can reinterpret, and you can do it. I don't like it much when I see it, but you can do Chekhov left wing, and you can do Chekhov right wing. You can make the young man who preaches revolution and change, and give, if you get the key to the house, throw it down the well, sort of Trevor Griffith style. You can do a Socialist Workers' Party Chekhov. It'll work. It will probably horrify Chekhov, but it'll work. Or you can do a nostalgic, what wonderful days they were when we had the cherry orchard and we went to France in our own carriage with our own serfs.
Yeah.
You can do the nostalgia. It covers an enormous spectrum of possibilities, whatever your convictions are. You can do a feminist Chekhov. You can do an anti-feminist Chekhov too.
Yeah.
That's very, very true. Yeah, amazing point.
The possibilities are endless, because he leaves so much unsaid that you can imply if you want.
Thank you so much, Donald. Are there any final comments that you want to make before we wrap it up?
I would only say that recently we've had such good translations of Chekhov that I feel that we've now got something definitive. The Wilkes translation we get in the Penguin, certainly for British readers, we obviously need different ones for Americans. And one can be fairly confident that without learning Russian, you got as close as you can to him. He's there. I was quite impressed when one long time ago I was given the Constance Garnett translations and asked if I'd like to do a new edition of them. And Constance Garnett was a pioneer in translating. She translated virtually everything. Some things she was no good at. She didn't like spiders and dirty staircases, so she couldn't do Dostoevsky. But Chekhov, she did very well, and all she did was make elementary mistakes because of the lack of a teacher and the lack of good dictionaries. So you'd take a story like Peasants, you'd have to make small corrections, like Chekhov has shards of pottery littering the place. She has skulls, so obviously they're not skulls. And she mistakes forests for ladders, which you can do if you're translating carelessly, but she can be corrected very easily. And she has the same style as Chekhov. She and her son, David Garnett, were actually born writers, born stylists in a Chekhovian style. So even if her Russian was not wonderful, when she went to Russia, she couldn't understand anyone and nobody could understand her. But I would say that she's worth reading in translation, that sometimes you approach a writer by triangulation. You read different translations, an older one and a modern one, so that he's completely possible to assimilate.
Mm.
So you would recommend the Ronald Wilkes translations?
Yeah, yes, I think. Of course, every translator tends to read the previous translations, and usually on the 10th or 15th time, they finally get the last mistakes eliminated.
Yeah, I'm rehearsing at the moment, and one actor has the Michael Frayn, and another actor has another translation of this bunch.
And Michael Frayn has the advantage of being an actor and a dramatist himself, so he knows what it sounds like on stage. I'm not sure whether Wilkes is better on stage because he's a desk man. I think if you are an actual actor and you know how it works, how it can be said, it's like writing a symphony. If you play one of the instruments, you might do a little better. But for prose, certainly Wilkes is best.
Okay, it's good to know. I didn't know Wilkes.
Again, Michael Frayn he had a very good teacher, and of course he had the army course to begin with, which people had on the national service, whereas if you didn't learn Russian properly, you had to march across the Yorkshire Dales with 60 pounds on your back. So people learned really well.
Yeah. Well, Donald, thank you for writing such an extraordinary book. It's I would recommend all our listeners to go and buy your book. Is there anywhere else you'd like to lead us with your work? Any other things you'd like to recommend us? Other writings of yours?
No, to use a well-known Chekhovian expression, buy my book or I'll smash your face in.
Thanks. There you go. Thank you. It's been an incredible education for us, and I hope we provided our audience with some insight into this this man and your writing on him.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. And perhaps there'll be a slim volume one day on Chekhov's daughter or supposed daughter.
Yes.
We look forward to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Helpful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed that discussion. And yes, you can continue to study the great dramatists in history. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to study these dramatists and kind of re-engage with this wonderful history we all have inherited. Please follow us on social media, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, and like and all that sort of stuff. It really helps us grow. We want to develop this all and keep talking to interesting people and providing an kind of interesting output for our audience. And please, if you can, book tickets to see our Yeats events. We are staging 3 short plays by W.B. Yeats. We are staging Calvary, Purgatory, and The Resurrection, and we have a response afterwards by Professor Roy Foster, who is the great living biographer of Yeats. So it should be a fantastic night, and we would love to see you there. And yes, and please get in touch if there's anything that we're doing that you're interested in, and anything you have that might intersect over, or just give us your thoughts about the work we're doing. So yes, thank you very much for listening.